You're at not good, but great data, and really talking about this stuff from how do you use the data for marketing, advocacy, and fundraising. Data is super, super important, but making sure that you have the right data that's easily at your fingertips so that you can pull it off and use it as you need to on a regular basis, I think was one of the successes of the organization that I worked with at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust in Minneapolis. So maybe back up, I think everybody's probably heard me share. Name's Jeff Washburne. Started with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust back in 2002 as its first staff person. At that time, the idea was born. It wasn't my idea. A whole bunch of folks came together in Minneapolis and said, let's start a land trust. And, we should raise some money and hire somebody to implement this thing. And they hired me. When I started, I had a desktop computer, a 2-drawer file cabinet, and $5,300 in the bank account. And that was really, I think, how a lot of land trusts start. On the desktop, my predecessor, there was a consultant that was there before me. It was back in the days when you didn't have to name a file or it didn't pull it from the title or the first words of your document. They way back in the day, if you went to hit save and you didn't type something in, it just went with 1. And then the next file was 2, and then 3 and 4. And so on my computer, I had 300 different files, but I had no idea what they were. And that's what I had to start with. And so at that point in time, I think any of us would be like, I gotta open these things up, see what's in there, and then start to create a file system. Fast forward 20 years from now, when we hired new people at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, they come in like, who created this file system? And I raised my hand because and I don't know if anyone else could have done any better at that point in time because you don't know where you're going. And I think a lot of that is kind of on the data front too, is that this stuff is super important, but you start to collect it and you don't know what you're going to use it for. You don't know what you might need. And so what I'm hoping to share today is 20 years of mistakes that hopefully, especially starter up community land trusts are going to be able to say, oh, this is the stuff we should be collecting. How do we do it now so we don't have to go back 10 years from now and start to backfill our databases to have good data? So session agenda, what are we going to do? I kind of gave that overview. Talking about overall organizational strategy as it relates to data management. Homekeeper versus other CRMs, databases. What are the options that are out there? Have a plan and implement it yesterday is something I want to talk about. Those key data points. So my wife always says, you shouldn't use the word should. But in this instance, I'm coming at you all to say you should collect these data points because you will use them at some point in time in your organizational life. And if you don't have them, future employers are going to be mad at you because you didn't collect them when you should have. And now they're having to do the work that we could have been doing today. Homeowner and home buyer surveys as data point collections as well. Successful examples of how data has been used. So using a lot of the examples that I think we kind of emerged at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. And then data uniqueness as it relates to our space in the community land trust world. And then just lessons learned. So I'm here, I guess, to say this stuff is really, really important. Data collection, not just maintaining a database of donors or individuals, but this data collection, the data that you get every time you have a closing, every time you have all these buyer and home demographics is really, really important to collect and then be able to use to leverage for marketing, advocacy, and fundraising down the road. It's also really important. I can geek out about it all I want, but if there aren't other people within your organization that are bought into the culture of that, it's going to be really, really tough. And I think within every organization, recognizing that it is important to collect data and make sure that everybody's contributing to that, and the data that's going in is really, really good. So if you're bringing on a high school student for a volunteer opportunity, and they don't know where to be looking to pull the data to put it into a database, you got to be careful because you're going to be relying on that information for a long, long time, and you got to make sure that it has some integrity when you put it in there. I'm going to talk about the pain points of not doing it early and or frequently enough, and just want to let folks know this is not. Don't ask me how to use Homekeeper. I am super dangerous. It's a really important tool, but I'm not the one to be teaching that. There are people here. If you want to talk about Homekeeper, talk to the 3 folks from Duluth, because I think they've been able to master. Oh, he's here. All right. So Don't ask Jeff Corey, but there's other 2 people from Duluth that really know how to use Homekeeper. So overall organizational data strategy. How are folks currently collecting data, and why are you doing it? What data points are you collecting, and why? One of our failings at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust was, and going to Damon's session before, talking about how you market to emerging communities, right? Like, we did good on the owner side, but on the front end, like, how many people are attending our orientations? How many of those translated to an application? How many of those translated to a purchase agreement and then ultimately purchased a home? And I think there's a story and there's some analysis, to your point, that can go on to say, what are we doing right? Where are we losing folks? Why are we losing folks? And looking upstream. And I think that's one of the areas that, to the credit of One Roof, when you incorporate it from the buyer all the way through the process, you start to get a lot better information that you can start to make some strategic decisions from. Your version of Homekeeper, when somebody makes an application, is it automatically populated in Homekeeper? Do you have that built into?
Yeah, that's
okay. All right. And I think that's ultimately the point that you're going to hear time and time again is this stuff is important, really important, and you got to develop a system that's going to work for you. And I'll talk a little bit more about the One Roof experience as well. I listed out different types of data your organization is collecting. General database, just collecting business cards and putting them in there because you may have an event down the road you want to invite folks to. Home buyers, talked about buyers coming into the system and making sure to be able to track buyers. Owners, clearly I think a lot of folks are tracking homeowners at that level. Industry partners, you take it for granted, but when you want to grab a list of all the realtors you've worked with, to be able to have that in one place is really, really powerful, and know that you can send out a communication to realtors or lenders or other parties. To have to build that database when you need it takes a lot of time and energy to be able to do that. And then funders, making sure that you can also, if you're having an event, you're having something, how do you make sure that you have it from a workflow kind of basis to have that data ready to be able to do so. So identify a data collection tool and utilize it. I think there's a lot of organizations that have gone with Homekeeper. We've talked about, so Monday, was that the name of it?
Yeah, it's like a project management
okay.
tool, so I'm really shoving a square peg into a round hole.
Back in the day with another organization I worked with, it was all about access. And then there's certain folks that still keep things in Excel. But it's making sure that you have a system around it. I think we'll get to a point in the next couple slides where, I see where Homekeeper is super, super powerful, but it's only as powerful as organizationally your organization can create a culture around it. And I think that's the critical piece in my observations about Homekeeper or any other sort of database management tool, is making sure that if you got it, use it and live it for the organization. Try not to be collecting data in multiple locations, right? I do things in Excel, Jake's doing them in Access, somebody else has collected a Word database, and we're trying to make all those things work. It's a mess, and you're wasting organizational time. So as a leader, if you're a leader of your organization, or if you have some influence in your organization, say, this is what we're doing. Everybody's got to get on board with it. Get the buy-in that you need, but make sure that you don't have data in 100 different places, because it's going to be just a mess. And so really trying to get it all in one place. And who's the point person? It shouldn't be Jeff Corey and it shouldn't be me. You need to have somebody within the organization that is the data police, that they're the ones coming to staff meetings and saying, all right, somebody's screwing up here, and give that person, if you're the director, give that person the power within your organization to be able to call those shots and support them, because I think data is a critically important aspect of the work. And then making sure that you can build data goals, whether it be your annual work plans or your strategic plan. Have some data points that are going to drive you to stay honest to that culture as well. Make sure that that's part of what you're sharing with funders, other stakeholders in your organization, that you have goals that are tied to your ability to be able to track and keep this data. So it's keeping you kind of in the game with all these stakeholder partners. So Homekeeper versus other CRMs. Homekeeper, it's Salesforce, Grounded Solutions Network, took it upon themselves to build it out and make it work, I think, better for shared equity types of organizations. One Roof Housing, utilizing it extremely well, and they use it exclusively. I got on the phone, Jeff has mentioned Jim a couple times. If you get a chance to talk to him about it, I picked his brain for over an hour a few weeks ago and really tried to understand why they have been able to make Homekeeper work to the level that they have. And so some of the key things, I was trying to grab real tangible things, must create and maintain culture. And Jim didn't go this far, but we got pretty far into the conversation, like 29 staff, right? Like, there's gonna be one or two staff people who are just like, this is dumb, I'm not doing it. And so how do you build that into your organizational culture to say at staff review time, like, look, you're not keeping up with your Homekeeper inputs. And so make sure that you're doing that, because this is something we're gonna be measuring you on. To your point, every time there's a call, every time there's an email, they're taking that information and plopping it into Homekeeper. And Jim said Brooke just came back from leave, and he was like, it's like she didn't miss a beat, because all those notes were already there. All she needed to do was go into the homeowner's file. She knew exactly what was going on, because everybody in the organization was dumping that information in there, and she could just look at the file and see where folks are at. That's powerful, and it's time saving. Up on the screen at all time. This is a super practical thing, but this is what I was trying to get at with Jim. Like, why does it work? He's like, well, when I walk into the office in the morning, I boot up, it's up there nonstop. I always have it up there, so it's really easy to go to. He's like, when I work from home and I don't have multiple screens, I have to close, I drop a screen down, then I bring up another screen. And he's like, there are times at home when I'm lazy and I don't do it. And he's like, that, having it open and having multiple screens is worth the investment to have good data management within your organization. Have data tech support to do the deeper reports. I mean, one of the things that Jim shared, he's like, I know this stuff pretty well, but they got a tech guru up there that knows Salesforce inside and out. And so Jim, when he gets stuck on a report, he can send an email to somebody and say, I need a report that's gonna give us these analytics or these data points, and they can build a report for that then makes it's easier for an organization. So not only do I think organizationally you have to build in the budget to pay for a Homekeeper or something else, but also make sure that you have the tech person that you need, if you can't have them on staff, that you can refer to and make sure that you can get those data points or reports when you need them. Online application feeds into the database, critical. And I know the City Lakes Community Land Trust is doing that. Sounds like some of our other folks here in the Twin Cities are doing it. Like, it just makes it so much easier if you have that information that's already feeding into the database. One less thing that a staff person would have to do. Homeowner, I talked about that. Notes in real time. And it's just essential for virtual work. I think as the workplace changed post-COVID, a lot of people working from home, and this is a way to manage a lot of data where folks can have that information in real time. We already kind of talked about the different mechanisms. And I think it's tough for small startup organizations to justify, I don't know what the cost is, $3,000, $4,000 for a subscription now. That's a big chunk of an early organization's budget, but really be thoughtful about, if you're not able to pull the switch on it, make sure that you're getting your data into a format that's easy to export into Homekeeper. The one thing that Jim shared with me as well, though, is the longer you wait to build that culture around Homekeeper, the harder it's going to be to get folks on. So if you're the only staff person, me 20 years ago, that would have been the best time for us to do Homekeeper, because that's all I would have known, and then anybody new coming on would have to do it my way, right? Like, so there's some benefits in doing it that way versus me growing up in an Excel life, trying to change my mentality as the leader of the organization just didn't work. So making the shift, committing to the shift, and saying, we're going to incent and or penalize you if you don't adapt this culture toward the database that's chosen. Have a plan and work it. Yesterday, be super intentional about this stuff early on. And the conversation with Jim really made me think about, as a director of an organization, financials and having good financials on a monthly basis is golden. And I think having good data at the same level and the same level of integrity is also that important. If your financials are all wonky and you present them to your board, I think it's the same kind of mistake that you're making if your data is not as strong as it could be at any point in time. And so making sure that you have strong data at all times, I think, is critical. And thinking about it the way that we think about having solid financials is, I think, a really good framework to do so. Begin collecting as much data as possible at the first closing. I mean, even what we talked about today, starting that even with the first buyer applications, I think, is critical. and develop a system of analyzing and reporting out that data, whether it be annual reports, funder reports, making sure that you're staying active in the analyzing of it to help better inform your programs and who you're serving and how you're serving folks. And use that data to inform programs and our mission work. There's a few examples that I'll show here moving on where the way we were able to slice and dice data really, really helped us understand where we should be prioritizing our programs, because we know disproportionately we're serving a whole heck of a lot more households of color through these types of programs. We wouldn't have known that had we not been really kind of analyzing the data and slicing and dicing it in different ways. So this is the should slide. It's small. Sorry for the folks in back, and I can share this. Over the years, I think these are definitely the critical things that need to be collected from the onset of every homeowner that you serve. And so however you collect it, however you get it in, I think is critical, because I can point to every one of these and talk about how I've used them over the years in helping us fundraise, advocate, or market the organization. And as I was going through this list, there was still a couple others that I think we still need to collect that we don't. Gender orientation is something that that wasn't something that we collected 20 years ago. It's something that's important to collect today. So 400 homeowners in, 500 properties, or homeowners, 500 homeowners that we've served, 400 properties in. It's going to be really tough because we don't collect that in our applications either, or at least the early versions of our applications we didn't. It's going to be really tough to go back and kind of backfill those kinds of things. But how do you start to collect that kind of information? Rehab development cost, we hadn't done a good job of that over the years. And so those are some additional data points that I think we could be bringing into this to better illustrate the leverage of dollars that we've been able to use with the organization over time. And we always collected first buyer information, but we didn't collect first generation buyers, and that's something that's becoming increasingly important here in the state of Minnesota. So as I was even creating this list, thinking of things that woulda, coulda, shoulda, and it's a lot more difficult. I can talk about entire Saturdays or Sundays where I spent 8 to 10 hours backfilling a column of data points that we didn't have in our database that we needed to be able to generate some of the stuff that I'm going to show you. And it was painful. And had we been doing that from the onset, it would have been so much easier. So think about how you're collecting data now. And if Homekeeper doesn't, I don't even know if Homekeeper has all these fields, but if it doesn't, figure out a way to start collecting that data and those data points so that you can use them and not manipulate the data, but use the data to analyze and help share the story of your organizations. Any questions on this? I know it's super small font, but again, we'll share this with folks. So as Jake was sharing, I have, it's still all in one massive Excel spreadsheet, 500 homeowners, all of these data points, across probably 50 some fields are getting collected on a regular basis. But it's good data. And when somebody wants to dive deep on our data, a university or somebody else, I pull the names out, pull out any other sensitive information. I send them that, and they feel like it's a gold mine of really, really powerful data that they're getting in this database when they get those points. Custom categories that you can add in within Homekeeper. But the problem being is if you hadn't been collecting them, you still got to go in and populate them after the fact, right? That's the point I guess I'm trying to make, is try to get these things earlier than later. I think that's where Homekeeper is probably a far superior tool. That's something that I hadn't been collecting, but I think over time realizing that there have been these changes and tweaks, and the other thing that happened over time is that we changed our qualified capital improvements policy a couple different times. So even if you put that information in, how does it really shake out? But I think those are important data points that we hadn't been collecting at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust either. So one of the things that they do in Baltimore is also put in the appliance or other warranty types of information on new construction, or I guess significant rehab too, if it made sense to collect that warranty information and keep that in Homekeeper. So it'd be really easy to pull out and share with folks if they ever needed to file a claim. Does this scare anybody? Do folks feel like you got most of these things that you're already thinking through? And maybe I was just the dumb one that didn't start collecting all this stuff from the get-go, right? Like address, income, race, number of people, number of bedrooms. And then it's like, oh my God, I should have been collecting not only the fee simple appraisal, but I also should have been collecting the leasehold appraisal figure. I also need to be making sure that I have the land value wherever we can get that to put that in there. Because every once in a while somebody will ask you for that, and then it's almost impossible if you haven't done the work to figure out what the average is, or what the range is of land values that you've brought into your land trust. 20 years of people asking me or us for all kinds of stuff, and it's really nice to be able to just spend 5 minutes on it versus an entire weekend trying to figure it out. I haven't grown. One of my biggest flaws is being a control freak, and so what needed to happen I think was to step away and make sure that the organization had a point person that was driving a lot of the data collection and kind of incorporating that thought into the organization. Yeah, I think one of the problems of starting as the sole staff person is you feel like you learn every piece of it, and it's tough to let go of stuff after you start it. And I think it's important to let go of things, and it's easier for some folks over others. All right, so homeowner or home buyer surveys. How many of your organizations survey your homeowners or buyers on a regular basis? So this was something that we stumbled into at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust back in 2012, and then we said this is good stuff. We should make a commitment to do this every 2 years, and for the most part, we did a good job of doing so. 2012, 2014, subsequent years, we're able to conduct a homeowner survey. And we had a whole bunch of different partners ranging from universities to contractors provided to us through NeighborWorks America. And each one of them has their own kind of take on what the right question is or how you structure that question. But the net is that we were getting constant feedback and an opportunity to hear from the folks that we served about how their lives were or weren't changing after they purchased their land trust home. So we have all this rich data that we collect. We know more about homeowners when they close because we have all of these data points that we collect on them. But once they get into their homes, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and what are the feedback loops that we're able to ask homeowners about what's changed in their lives? And I think really, really, really good source of data that I think especially plays well with funders, because once you're hearing from the folks that you actually serve, it carries a lot more weight than any one of us going to a funder and talking about our work. If they can see in writing, hey, this is what the homeowners are saying, it's really, really important. I think if you got an educational institution in your community, a college, a university, in Wisconsin, every county has its own extension service. Being able to partner and collaborate with a university, folks that spend their time designing and mastering surveys. I mean, we got enough on our hands to do, and have a third party do it, because then it's only going to be all that more legitimate in the eyes of the outside community looking at that. We also began, because we were doing it every 2 years, starting to be more intentional about, if we asked a question last year, let's try to ask the same question so that we can start to compare those responses year after year after year. And it took us a while to figure out what were the right questions to ask, and so really see it as a bit of a design-do process, that the early questions that were really mostly formulated by us did not pass the standards of the educational community. So I think all the more reason to partner early on with a university or a college, have them design the questions, because they're more familiar with how to ask the question in the right way to get the right type of response that they need. But then be consistent about trying to include that year over year over year, so that you can start to trend and see the differences in those responses. Our most recent survey, at the time of that, we had over 105 resales. And so we had good data points for probably 75%, or contact information for about 75% of those past homeowners. And so it was the first time ever we sent a survey to past homeowners. And we got about a 34% response rate, but that was really good information too, to go back to folks that at one point in their lives had lived in a land trust home, to help inform, what percent of them went on to buy a market rate home within 2 years. And for us, that was a huge data point, even though it wasn't a huge response rate, to know that over 70% of our past homeowners that we assisted into home ownership went on to buy a market rate home within 2 years. Really, really kind of took the wind out of the sail from the community. It says that the land trust doesn't help folks do better, and you can just lift out that data point, and funders, politicians, others would be like, oh, wow, that's a pretty significant figure. So in our case, capturing those kinds of that information was really, really powerful. Some of the other things, adult education, the number of homeowners that we assisted that, maybe had a GED, but didn't have any secondary type or college education beyond homeownership. The percent of homeowners that went back to school after they purchased a home. That was a powerful data point that we collected, saw that it was significant. Community engagement, income changes, safety and stability. The holy grail, the one that I was trying to see if we could right size and figure out, and worked with several universities on seeing if we could get to this data point, was that of net assets. So we can, I think, fairly accurately figure out what a homeowner's net assets are when they purchase the home or at time of closing. To be able to come up with the right data points and make sure that with the information that's being provided back to us at a future point in time, if we could capture that and show the community what the net asset changes of the households that we serve, I think that would be a super, super powerful data point that would enlighten a whole bunch of critics and supporters of the community land trust movement. Big lift, but the payoff is huge in kind of doing these homeowner surveys and developing relationships in your work to say, hey, let's try and do this. It's okay to start small. And there aren't a lot of other folks in the home ownership space, aside from Habitat, that's doing this kind of longitudinal homeowner connections, work. Most CDCs sell a home and then they move on. We have this long-term relationship with homeowners, so we got to be able, I think we're in a great position to be able to work that relationship and ask our homeowners to help us do better through that work. And we'd always, a drawing for $100, $250, maybe a $500 gift card to folks that they're thrown into a hat and then they win these prizes, but just trying to get folks to fill out this information. It takes their time, but it's super, super helpful, and so making sure that you create some sort of a reward incentive for folks to put in the time to fill these surveys out. What we would do is we'd send out an email, we'd send up another follow-up email, send up another, and then we'd often split up the list among staff and say, all right, who knows these folks best? Let's do one follow-up call to see if we can get them to fulfill this. The other thing, though, is I think a longer-term approach, and there's the homeowner engagement track or session here, is developing that long-term relationship and creating opportunities for connection and investing in the homeowners. So, a couple years ago, we bought a couple hundred tickets to the amusement park over here, and we invite homeowners to say, look, if you want to come, it's on us. But it also creates this holy crap, this land trust just gave essentially 4 tickets to my family to go to an amusement park. I think investments like that, I wouldn't say you guilt homeowners into saying, all right, I'm going to do this one for them because they created a day for us. But it's a lot of give and take, and it's a lot of investment into the homeowners for the right reasons to build that connection. But I think it also makes an impact with the folks that are served to say, you know what, this organization's thinking about us just beyond selling us the home. They're investing back in us. And you make the case to say, look, this information is so critical to our mission. It's going to help us help more households like we helped you. Please consider the 10 minutes it's going to take to fill this thing out. Mean a ton to us. We had 70% response rate of our existing homeowners in our most recent survey, and that was at the time probably 350 homeowners, which is a pretty significant figure, and it provided us a lot of really, really good data for the existing homeowners. But it took a lot of time and energy, but it was so worth it. Up to $500 in a drawing, so that's not a small chunk of change. So it was 500, 250, and 100 or something like that. So you had 3 chances. So that was the initial hook. Send an email with a link. They can fill it out on the phone, on the computer. Sent that a couple times. Said it was really important. We bump back deadlines, all the tricks that I think people use. And then we made a goal to say, we really want to get to 70%. How do we get there? And then we sat down in a staff meeting and said, all right, these are all the folks that didn't respond to us yet. Who knows that person really well? Who's got a I owe you coming in from somebody else? And then we just split the list among staff and said, between now and next week, everybody make these calls and see if we can get a few more. And that's what got us over 70%. Not easy. But I mean, it gets back to the whole culture thing. Like if you want to do this and if you set a goal for yourself, if you put that goal in your work plan, then your board's going to look at that and say, why didn't you get to 70%? Well, we just didn't want to do it anymore. well, we had to get there. And so I know one of our colleagues, Shang, would always take it as a homeowner of the organization. She'd take the test and see how long it took her to take it, and always was able to do so within 10 minutes, and I think that was always kind of our goal. But there were a number of instances where you can go in and see that people started, they got 3 minutes into it and then they stopped. And so really trying to follow up with folks to see why did you stop? Well, I had a kid coming to me and I just had to get off the computer, but yeah. Yeah, and we never asked for like, what's your income today? We had ranges. So is your household income between 80 and 90,000, 100, so it didn't give you an exact number, but I think you could look back and say, we know that they were making $48,254 when they purchased their home, and now they're making between $60,000 and $70,000. There's a positive gain there over a 2-year period of time. And then, how many people live in their home now? Like a lot of folks get married after they bought a home, right? Like, let's analyze the numbers to say, is that increase in income in the household number of people living in the house didn't change? Or is there now 4 people living there and we know circumstantially that somebody got married, and so clearly there's another income there to see, can we attribute that income to the household just doing better, or is it because there was another income brought into the household? Both good things, but just knowing and understanding the data a bit better as well. Yeah, I don't think there's any shortage of things that we could and should be surveying about. Is how do you package that and not hit homeowners up every month with a new survey? Is how do you make it as comprehensive as possible, get it into once every 2 years, and then try to package it with a whole bunch of incentives and or opportunity within that.
Do that work on your end.
And I failed to mention that probably a dozen or so of every one of those survey responses was done over the phone because folks just weren't comfortable getting on a computer and doing that. So one of our colleagues at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust was essentially going through those questions, and she actually got training from the researcher on like the protocol to use to make sure that there weren't leading suggestions for how that person should respond to things and those kinds of things as well. I don't know if folks are just kind of a much higher touch with many of the households that we serve, making them, especially if they're older or maybe not as computer literate, making sure that they're comfortable getting that information out there. Phone numbers plugged into their phone so that they know who's calling them, those kinds of things. All right, so I'm going to touch on a few things that I was able to work on over the years that felt like they were really, really useful tools for the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. So this was a little better, right? Like, so two spreadsheets here, front and back, and I'll share these with you all. But essentially, number of homeowners' homes, resales, average CLT price, blah, 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 blah. Who was served, what percent, African American, white, Asian American, da, da, da. Percent of income, number of households with children. And then it's by program. So here's the total condo homeowners, town homeowners, single family homeowners, Project Reclaim, which was a contract for deed program, Project Sustain Legacy, our program where we help existing homeowners bring their home into land trust, and then we have a buyer initiated program. So slicing and dicing that data in different ways helped inform us to say, where are we serving households with a bunch of kids? Where are we serving predominantly households of color? Using those analytics to help us and the board make decisions about where we should be raising funding and making the case to funders of how we should be raising those dollars. Scrolling down, so these two. So I'd slice the numbers by program through a whole bunch of those figures, and then this is by year. So, over the 20-year period, capturing a whole bunch of that information. How many homes did we increase the land trust by every year? What was the average CLT price? What was the average market price? How much was that gap in between the two? Who are we serving AMI? Who are we serving households of color? How many people in the households? And then slicing it by the program as well. And for a year or two, comparing 1 or 2 years doesn't do a lot. But when you start to look at it over a 20-year period of time, and you start pumping a lot of these different data points into graphs, it is so helpful to a board or to a funder to not have to look at this thing, right? Like, this is maddening to look at. I like looking at it. But if you can find some really good graphs or pictographs to depict this information, that stuff is golden. And to be able to tell the story at a rolled up level makes a lot of sense. And even if you're sitting down with somebody and you just hand this to them, they're not going to look at it right away. But if you can point on one specific point on there and make that point that you needed to make because you had data to back it up, you're legitimate. Not many other organizations can slice and dice their data this way. And so to be able to do this on a regular basis, I'd populate this thing every year, update it by the year, and it was so very helpful to invest. And this didn't, maybe an hour or two, But to have that for the entire next year, to be able to point to relevant data was so critical to the growth of the organization.
Is this in Excel?
Yes. So all that information that Jake currently had, I pull all that information in and then condense it down into a much smaller Excel
So you
spreadsheet.
take data from Homekeeper and put it into Excel.
No, this is the flaw of the City of Lakes Community Land Trust that my colleagues are fixing now that I'm gone. Right.
Homekeeper.
Yeah, is that all that good data that's still in the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet, still can be brought into Homekeeper, but there's some key data points that Homekeeper currently doesn't have in in the CLT's Homekeeper database that still resides on this spreadsheet. So we have two different databases going on, which is not good. Earlier point, don't do that. Don't do what we're doing, right? Like, or we did, right? That they're fixing now. That yeah, they can. Those are the lessons. Don't hire me, right? That. To be fair, we wouldn't have the data if Jeff hadn't been doing it for 20 years.
And Excel.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. Bring this back up. All right. So the next one. So the homeowner surveys. I'm going to bring this one up too. I talked about the homeowner surveys. This last one we did was probably the most instrumental one. It's a 6-page document. Talked about who we surveyed, who we got responses back from, and then a whole bunch of these pictographs that I think have been really, really easy to share with folks. Data points of who we collected, information from, number of homeowners impacted by COVID, percent of homeowners reported they have a better quality of life, sense of security, confidence in handling financial crisis, ease of saving money. So all this stuff was reported from homeowners in those homeowner surveys. This data point I just mentioned, over 70% of past homeowners who sold their CLT homes between 2016 and 2021 went on to buy, that was who sold, but down here, I'm sorry. There's a data point here that says number of homeowners went on to buy market rate homes. But that was, this is the kind of report that I think it's been good in sharing with funders along with those other data points to say we're measuring it in the information we have, and we're also measuring this data from the homeowners when they respond to the surveys that we collect from them. And I'll just move on to this one. So this is one that I started to collect before the foreclosure crisis. It's called a Return on Community Investment Report. In Minneapolis, there's 81 Minneapolis neighborhoods, and they do a really good job of capturing the median home value every year for each neighborhood. And so if we know where the City of Lakes Community Land Trust homes, what neighborhood they reside in, we can tell what the percentage increase or decrease year over year, dependent on where that home is located, depending on the neighborhood increase or decrease. And it's not an exact science, but I think it's a pretty good barometer. What that led us to do was say, and this is the most recent report, that the initial purchase price of the land trust home is this bar here. So for those in the back of the room, $43 million of the $60 million in the total portfolio that was brought into the land trust from the beginning to today, or till 12/31 of last year, amounted to about $60 million when it was purchased, whenever it was brought into the land trust over that 20-year period of time. At the end of 2022, we believe that the value of those homes has gone up to closer to $90 million. So there's essentially $30 million of increase in value, overall value of the homes that are in the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. We used a 25% resale formula, appraisal based. And so by doing that, we can say that $25,000 value increase, we can go back to the funders and say $17.8 million was invested over these 300 and how many homes at that time? 354 homes. So there was $17 million we went out and raised an affordability gap that went into these 354 homes. But that $17.8 million, the value, the 75% of the value increase of that $25,000 is $19.4 million. So we put in $17 million in over 20 years. The value increase, 75% of the increase is $19.4 million, which equates to now $37 million in affordability gap. 19 million of that, we didn't have to go out and fundraise. Those are dollars that we rode the market on. And able to go back to a funder and say that this is 108% return on investment. So every dollar you gave us is now worth $2.08 is a really, really, really powerful statement. So to be able to use these data points to be able to tell this story has been golden. And it doesn't always work this way. You know, I was doing this report back during the foreclosure crisis, and everything was negative. I didn't make as big of a deal, but I made sure to still do this report to know how things were doing. And now we're in this high market, and the story, I think, is a really powerful one. Any questions on this? I kind of bumbled through it, but I think that's definitely possible. You know, in Minneapolis, 0.5% of all ownership units are tied to the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. So it's still a small percentage. But I think as the organization grows, some of those comparisons, and clearly folks at universities would love to probably dissect and do some of this work at a much deeper level than anything I would be able to do. So I think that should be and could be on the table. One of the things that excites me kind of at the Minnesota level, if we could do the same thing across all 1,400 homes in trust, that's a much, much bigger number than this. And how do we take that big number in the hundreds of millions of dollars and go to the state legislature and say, I mean, the case I'd want to make is any dollar that you're not investing in the land trust is not a wise investment of public resources and affordable housing, right? Like that's a bold statement. And then to be able to back it up, I think is really, really powerful to really put the pressure on to say more needs to be invested, not the same. So yes, where we did not do a good job at the City of Lakes Community Land Trust was collecting the rehab money, which isn't part of this calculation anyway. All we were really representing here is affordability gap. Okay. We do, and we had done a really good job of knowing all the sources of affordability gap per home by funding source. And so in years past, I had broken that out. X percent of this increase in $19 million is Hennepin County, X percent was the state, X percent was the city of Minneapolis, X percent were other sources, to be able to say, representatively, this is how much of your money has now increased, and this is how much it would be worth today, kind of thing. Right. So yeah, that's what this $6.4 million figure is the share of the homeowner increase in value. Right. I think taking that, this is not the time for it, but 2 years ago, I was like, we should be able to report back to homeowners where they're currently, snapshot of where they're sitting today. How much have they paid down on their principal of their mortgage? Take that with what we estimate their share of the increase in value is. Put that into a letter and kind of like a stock investment report that you get every year is like, show them where their investment is right now. I thought it was the best idea ever. And it just was confusing as all get out to people. We got a ton of calls like, why did you send me this? You're saying that, and then at the same time in Minneapolis, the city came out and started assessing land trust properties for the land trust effective price versus the fair market value. So there was also huge savings realized by homeowners the next year, the current year in their property taxes. We're like, we got to tell this story. There's all these data points, and we can share with them that this was a really good thing for them. But we get the call, and I thought we wrote it well, and they'd be like, why did my property value go down? What did you guys do to it? And it just turned into an absolute mess. I thought it was a really good idea that this just didn't go so well. But there were a lot of really good data points that we had that I thought would be really good to share with homeowners. And I think there's probably still a way to do that resonates better, but I clearly was not the one to come up with the letter. Yeah. So I'm gonna keep moving along. Another report that we did was called just a resale report. This one's somewhat dated, but we want, I think from time to time, especially as you start to have resales, is to go back and say, does your resale formula work? And what's the story that you can tell? So this was, I don't know, maybe we had about 87 resales. So it was still a couple of years ago that we did this analysis. And what we found actually with that 25% appraisal-based resale formula, based on the average income of the households who all sold when they purchased compared to all the new homeowners who purchased the same homes, If you looked at just the AMI served, we had slipped by 2 percentage points. The first tranche of homeowners that eventually sold, their average median income was 54.3%, and 56.3% was ultimately who we served upon resale. Now there's a whole bunch of factors, number of people in the household, interest rates at the time, all kinds of other things that probably played into that comparison. So it's not something that I think you should read too much into, but I think it's another way to kind of analyze, are you on path with what you said you're gonna do, and how well is that resale formula working? In our case, a lot of people come at us and say, 25%, that's not enough. I could argue maybe it should be at 22%, right? Like, and to be able to have that conversation, we're not gonna make that change, but I think to say we're actually losing affordability the way we're measuring it right now, again, a whole bunch of factors go into it, but to be able to talk to it and be very open about how we're keeping an eye on it to see if it is or isn't performing well, I think is really important. I generally think that our homes have become more affordable, but the households who are purchasing have been higher income. And so there's a story in that as well to say where are we, or where should we be doing a maybe deeper diving in our outreach and marketing, or where should we have been doing that? But yeah, good point. As you can tell, I'm still forgetting that I don't work for the City Lakes Community Land Trust, and my pronouns are still struggling. I'm working my way through that. That's trying to break a 20-year habit, sorry. All right, I think just a couple more slides here. Data uniqueness of and for CLTs. This is where I think we have a real competitive edge over a lot of other CDCs and folks doing affordable home ownership especially, is that we have these relationships with the buyers, the owners, and past homeowners. We also have rich data not only at the first closing, but every subsequent resale. You know, imagine this thing 40, 50 years out. There's gonna be a whole heck of a lot more resales. And so what can we do with that data to really help tell our collective story as land trusts? The ability to track those investments over time, we chatted a little bit about that. And then capturing the changes in the household demographics. I mean, if you say what you're intending to serve a lot more households of color, and you're not doing it, then the data is there to help support what maybe you need to be doing to do a better job of doing that. And then property structure changes over time. There was a point made about, it wasn't about if you were going to make changes or capital improvements to the property, how are you capturing those things to make sure that that's reflected? So if square footage is changing over time, are there ways to capture the changes in the actual property or structure as well? Other thoughts? And then lessons learned. I think this might be the last slide. Working with an educational institution, college, university, otherwise, has multiple benefits. The credibility and legitimacy of working with a third party educational institution is powerful. The capacity, they often have a bunch of students that need a project that works really well. And then the promotion. So many of our past surveys have been like just put out there on the internet, and those reports and studies have been put out there for others to see, which is really, really helpful. Importance of developing an organizational culture around data collection. Again, the conversation with Jim Philbin over in One Roof was really, really helpful to me to really try to better understand how, from an organizational culture perspective, you build this into the DNA of the organization and how important that is. And quite honestly, one of the things that we didn't get right in my time at the City Lakes Community Land Trust. Analyze it annually, if not more frequently. Don't wait to populate. So keep populating the spreadsheet, keep it up to date, and live it like you would your financials, your organizational financials. Much easier to collect more data points than you need than to not have enough and then have to try and backfill them at a later time. Started collecting it yesterday along the same lines there. Data isn't important until it's important, and then not having it is super painful, right? Like, I don't need to worry about this. This guy, like, he's out to lunch. I guarantee you're gonna come back to this session and be like, gosh darn it. I was jazzed about doing this when I got back to my organization. We didn't do it, and now I need this data point, and I'm spending 3 hours trying to get it together, right? It's gonna happen.
It's the same with pictures.
Yeah, right. Policymakers and funders love it, especially if you can create a pictograph or a graph, get it into an easy format, make it easy to share, digest. That stuff is golden. They take it, they forward it, they do all kinds of stuff with it, and it's really, really great. The complicated spreadsheet that I shared before, not so much. But those kinds of pictographs, I think, really work. And researchers also love, again, if you have a rich database of data that are researchers that then can do whatever they do with census data or American survey data, they love crunching that stuff. And if you have a real life set of bodies and homeowners that they can take and start to do analysis with, I'm not suggesting any of us do that high level kind of analysis. Let the people who really geek out on this stuff do that. But there are people out there, and if you have a good, rich data set, people can do all kinds of wild things with your information. That resale report that you all had, like, that's good stuff, and let somebody just run with it. And future staff will dislike you if you don't do it well. If there's anything to remember, you're long gone, we're all long gone. I'll have a gravestone somewhere, and some future City Lakes Community Land Trust staffer is going to be going over there and kicking that thing because we didn't do it well enough. And I think about your gravestone. I think if we can is what future generations of people will be doing to your gravestone is what I'm hopeful people will leave this session thinking about, why it's important to do and have good data within your organization. Right. Yeah.
That was one of the lessons.
That was what?
Think about your gravestone should be added.
Yeah, right. People will dislike you. They will severely dislike you if you don't do this well today. Yeah, I mean, I guess the analogy would be that of the financials, or even using a home analogy, is like if you have a crappy foundation, everything you build on top of it is subject to collapse and crumble or cost you a lot more time because you didn't do the foundation right. And I think good data, starting earlier, making the investments, makes a lot more sense. And hindsight's 20/20. I would have done things a lot differently knowing what I know now. And maybe that's that in the gravestone, or like there are things that you can do that are going to take some time and energy on the front side, but they will have tremendous payoffs down the road, not only for you, but more importantly, the organization, the enterprise. I think the balance point with a lot of what we do in the land trust space is this balance between, does it look, feel like home ownership, and what's draconian and what's not. I think the conversation about how you talk about it before closing to build in that culture is really good. And if you do require it, can you enforce it, right? Like, I think that's the other thing, is like, I'd be afraid to put that into a ground lease, because then it'd be one more thing that we got to make sure that we're holding up our end of the deal on, right? So it feels like work on that end too. Yeah, I mean, some of those data points in our homeowner survey track if people had advanced their education, they've gotten different jobs, those kinds of things. That would track the people, but not necessarily tracking the relationship with them by any means. All right, I want to thank you all for putting up with this. Thank you for your time. It's 2:30.